It's time to present Scott DuPont to bring you another episode of Finance Your Movie with tips and strategies to help you get your money to tell your story. It's time!
Okay, I am your host, Scott DuPont of Finance Your Movie, and we're going to do things a little bit differently today. We have a absolute jam-packed show, and hang on to your seat because you're probably not going to believe this story. I got a phone call, and I didn't believe the story either. So I'm not even going to introduce my two guests, but I am going to set the stage. This is based on a true story. March 7th, 2019, exterior night. Filmmakers from the Untitled Movie Project held a panel in front of a live audience in the back patio of the famous Harold's Coffee in West Palm Beach. On the panel was award-winning writer-director of the film, Rick Pamplin, and Louise Levinson, who's here with us today, a financial consultant in the entertainment industry for over 30 years, specializing in film business plans. Some of her clients, such as Selma Hayek and Danny Glover, are famous. Other clients often become famous, like the first-time filmmakers of the Blair Witch Project.
There you go.
After opening remarks from the panel, Mr. Pamplin asked if there were any questions from the audience. Palmer Edwards, who is here with us right now, stood up from the audience, walked up to the microphone, introduced himself as a writer, and then Palmer, do you remember what you said, what your introduction was?
Thank you for having me on to begin with. This is a big honor, especially with both of you guys here, and Louise. Everybody knows her. Well, we all do. But anyway, I remember stepping up to the mic and I told him how many scripts I had written and what, if he had any advice on what it would take to get one made and get some funding for it. And he gave me some tough advice.
He did. And I think at the point you had written like 12 screenplays.
I think at that point
It was eight.
Like 8. Yeah, eight.
Eight. Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't know who you were. You stepped up to the microphone. You had written a bunch of screenplays, but not one film had been financed and none had been produced. And so you guys take it from here. I want to know what happened because I got a phone call a year and a half later. I almost fell out of my chair. So did you go over and talk to Louise after the panel?
I don't think we did we talk to them? Oh, we
Yes,
did.
ma'am. We did.
So you guys please connect the dots for our
But
audience.
I don't think that I knew. Did I know then that you knew Joe?
I introduced myself. You were still sitting at the panel.
Yeah.
And it was right. They had just wrapped, and everyone was kind of milling around. And I spoke to you, and I had mentioned the last two scripts I had written, and I had let you know that Joe Majestic, who's a producer, had suggested I come down to the film.
Right. Yeah. But
meet you guys.
I didn't remember that I know he just told me that somebody would be there, but yeah.
Right. And you and I spoke, and we talked briefly, and it's I found out one thing. This is all about making connections with people,
Right.
and
Right.
building that connection and keeping it going, and just keep following through and following up and following through and following up.
And what did Rick say to you?
What did Rick say to me that night?
But
that I
when you
needed-
said you had 8 screenplays, he said,
he said,
I
"You need-
remember if you don't, Palmer.
Go ahead.
It was
Go ahead.
something like this.
make one.
Sir, you are not a screenwriter. If
Right.
you've written that many screenplays and not one of them has been optioned, if not one of them has been sold, and you don't have one of those films in production or produced, you are not a screenwriter. And then I will let everyone listening to this podcast go watch the last scene of the movie for the follow-up advice Rick Pamplin gave after that. But it brought us to this point. Now I got to ask, Louise, did you work on the business plan with
No,
Palmer?
no.
So you guys just connected, you got some advice.
We had him, he called me later and we got together and we talked about the film.
Okay, so you talk some strategy.
And we talked about the film because he was already working with Joe. I've known Joe Majestic more than 20 years. And we were both in Los Angeles at the time. And then he moved and all this. So it's an incredibly small world.
And I know Joe too.
And so Joe was very, I've written several business plans for his clients, and he's very good at raising money, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, he's successfully raised money for several different films.
Yeah.
So
Palmer, we had a really great lunch. We talked about the movie and, you know, that sort of in different, how to do things, that sort of thing.
So Palmer, why don't you connect the dots here? You had aligned yourself with Joe Majestic, who is a client of Louise's. He's successfully raised money for other films. Connect the dots for us, how you got your film financed.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna bring backstory real quick. I met Joe at a film festival, or more like a film club that was in Southwest Florida. And he and I stayed in touch, and he told me early on, he said, if you want to be a screenwriter, you need to go to school. And I said, I'll call you when I get out of school. And 3 years later, I called him, said, okay, I'm done. Now what? And we got together and we came up with this concept of the Red Tide Massacre, because one of the things I'd learned in film school was that if you wanted to, the easiest way to make your first movie is to make a horror movie, because they translate well. And so then one thing started falling to another, and I met Louise, and Joe and I had this screenplay, and we worked on it and polished it and polished it and polished it, and I rewrote it and rewrote it. And then we just started, I got into being doing a pretty good job at making pitch decks to demonstrate what we were going to do. It was an easy way to put a visual a calling card out there, visual calling card. And so I started shopping it around, and I had remembered some stuff that you had actually, Scott, you had said about the follow-up night when we were filming, about people never follow up.
The fortune is in the follow-up.
Yes. And I stayed with it, and I approached a lot of people, and I got shot down a lot.
Right. Yeah.
And then I got with one person who was willing to buy shares in our movie. And then I found another guy that was willing to buy a lot of shares also. And then I found another person who was willing to buy some shares. And all of a sudden I called Joe up one day and I said, we're fully funded.
Wow. You don't have to disclose the exact budget if you don't want to at this point, because I know the film is not out there. But what would you say the budget range is? Is this under 250K, under 500K, under $1 million?
Under $1 million.
Okay, under $1 million. And it sounds like you did most of the fundraising calls yourself.
Correct.
Good for you. And this was the first time you had done it?
100% first time.
Wow. What did you learn during that process? And Louise, chime in here if you have some feedback as well. But
I just want to give you a quote that I use a lot, that the producer, John Sayles, I said, and I have I've always had in my book, that when you're raising money for a film, it's like putting your thumb out for a ride, and it could be the first person that stops. It could be the 1000th person that stops. It could be the 3000th person that stops, but you have to keep standing out there with your thumb out looking for the ride. And that's exactly what he did.
So yeah. Palmer, this is fascinating. We had hoped and dreamed, this is one of Rick's missions, was that people would see the finished film, they would get a few tips, strategies, and ideas, and be inspired and empowered to go raise money and make their movie. But here you are, the movie's not even out yet, and you did it. So what are some of the things you learned picking up the phone, calling people up for money?
Be very prepared before you open your mouth, because you might just have one shot with this person. make sure that you know who you're going to, make sure that you maybe know a little bit of their background, because people like to, if they're going to go into business with you, they want to know that you've been diligent enough to research them a little bit, not that you're just walking by and throwing darts at anything that moves. That for some reason you think they're worthy for you to work with. And that kind of, at first I wasn't very good at that, but then I kind of gathered that was a good thing to do.
Practice makes perfect, right? You're probably a lot better on the 50th call than you were on the first.
Yes, I was. Yes.
And anything surprise you or shock you, how tough it was, how easy it was for the people that said yes over the phone?
The yes is when the people said yes. And the second investor that I spoke about, he has never been anything in the film industry. And he was extremely, extremely excited about this and has followed the process. And when his name appeared on IMDb as a executive producer, he was on the moon almost. And he has a fair financial stake in our project. And it also put the word out, it also made me realize there's a lot of pressure on my end because we have to produce, and we're in editing right now, and we've moved along, and we actually did a bi-coastal movie. We did 80% of it in LA and 20% in Florida. So that was to be my first shot out the door. I did it the hard way. I was did it across the country, but we moved most of the crew back to Florida for the second part.
Yeah, I was shocked that you were actually filming out here in California. So good for you doing that. But you were based in Florida at the time that you're finishing the polish of the screenplay and starting to raise the money, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, were most of and you don't have to give any of their names, the people who deserve to have their names in the credits, you'll see it when you see the Red Tide Massacre when it comes out. But were a lot of the investors who said yes and wrote checks, were they Florida based? Were they LA based? Were they all around the country?
100% Florida based.
Okay. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because typically people in your network where you live are tend to be more apt to invest. Plus there's I don't want to say a million, but there's hundreds of thousands of producers and filmmakers in LA all looking for money.
Right.
So yeah, I'm not surprised. Any advice or tips you want to share with people? I'm just still blown away because this was your first film. You did all the raising the money yourself and you were successful. And any advice you want to share with fellow aspiring filmmakers?
Go to the investors. And I stopped calling them investors. I said, I want to talk to you. Are you interested in being a producer on a movie? And that brought it up a level because you can invest in a lot of stuff, but how many people ever get asked to be a producer on a movie? And that made it unique and it made it a little more glamorous. So I was asking the same question, but I was changing my words to make the introduction a little prettier. And that was one of the things that I learned. When I started doing that, people really wanted to talk to me the second, third time.
Wow. I learned something new every single day. And I just learned a valuable lesson from you. Because when I call people up, I don't judge people one way or the other. I don't know if they're going to put $5,000 or $10,000, whatever the minimum is, or 50 or 100,000 if they want to be a producer, the starting level of producer. But what you just said is a brilliant idea, is lead with, hey, how would you like to be a producer of a film? I've been asking all this time, how would you like to invest in a film? So thank you, Palmer. You just taught me something.
Well, I appreciate it. It was kind of, I don't know, it was out of frustration. And I said, I've got to lead with, I think I'm leading with my chin, because as soon as I said investor, most of them stopped listening. But when I said producer, people kept listening.
So they're all listed on the film as producers?
Not everyone, but the
Ah.
two big ones are.
Oh, yeah.
You know that, Louise. You gotta pony up for that
That's
those
right.
producer credits.
That's right. to get on the screen, you have to show a lot of green.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why certain people do that. You know, they have more upside if the movie is profitable, and I certainly hope it is, but you also have that recognition factor of seeing your name on the screen. It's kind of a neat thing to talk about at cocktail parties. So that's a really interesting nuance, is leading. How would you like to be a producer in a film?
And one other quick thing that I learned too, and actually Joe Majestic was the one that really schooled me on this, was I got to know what the tax credits were, and about the tax credit. I looked all that stuff up about 181, section 181, and about different states have different tax credits and stuff, because that really makes it a lot easier to swallow for a lot of people when they start hearing that.
Yeah. So two questions on that. Number one, did you use section 181 for any of your investors? And then the second question, did you get any California tax credits?
The first question is, the two big ones will use 181.
Okay.
And with this year, naturally. And we didn't spend enough in California to get the credits.
But you saved on all your Florida sales tax. You got that exemption, right?
We saved on Florida stuff, and we're moving to our another movie right now that's going to be in Oklahoma, and it's unbelievable what their tax credits are. And I'm also working with a state representative in the Florida House about getting that pushed through to get the tax incentives back. Actually, we found out we went to high school together, so it was like, it was a real easy connection.
Okay, I'm going to put on the brakes here for just a second.
Okay.
We're gonna back up a second. The movie's not even out yet. You just financed and produced your first film. You're now developing a second film.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
And
Have you
two
started
other
fundraising
options.
for that yet?
Yes, sir.
Are you partially funded?
We have
A few investors?
yes, we have a few investors.
Oh,
We're working on it.
Wow.
Wow. You are a machine, Palmer. I bow to you.
And I also have a couple movies optioned now too, a couple more.
Wow. So you must see the end scene in Movie Money Confidential to find the great advice that Rick Pamplin gave Palmer
Right.
Edwards.
Yes.
100%.
And you must have sitting there and just taken down every single word that Rick said, because I'm amazed right now that you've got investors in your second film. You've optioned some of your other screenplays in just a year and a half. It's a pretty short period of time.
Well, I had put a lot of effort into getting to that point, but yes.
Right. Yeah. It didn't
Yes,
just
and-
happen. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I always tell my lucky break was when I met Joe Majestic, for me personally.
Yeah.
That was my lucky break, because he and I mesh very well together, and
He's a terrific guy.
yes, he is. And then I got to meet Louise, and I got to meet some other, and then I got to come to your thing, and I got to meet you, and I got to meet Rick, and it's just parlayed, and all the people that I get to deal with now. It's amazing, the people that call me every day.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited that you could be on the podcast today, and I'm glad that Rick gave you some valuable advice. I'm glad that you took a little bit of my advice. But Louise, I want to ask you this, because I believe this is very important. Someone like Palmer, who just doesn't have the producing experience yet, how valuable would it say when you're creating the business plan and the overall strategy, that Palmer, or someone like Palmer, a first-time filmmaker,
Mhm.
how important is it to align themselves or build out their team with another veteran film producer who's been through the trenches?
Excuse me. You know, it's also, I mean, one of the hardest things for people to do is raise money. It's a skill. And I always feel that if a screenwriter comes to me and they don't have any attachments, I would like them to have a producer attached who can help with that part of it.
Or just have the experience, right? The resume, like Joe
Well,
Majestic.
yeah. And, you know, you don't have to have a director and producer, but it's helpful if you do.
Yeah, so I think that was
Definitely you want to have help. I mean, it's good to have a producer who like knows the whole thing, because you can help guide you in terms of putting together everything else, the cast and all that sort of thing. But yeah, it's if there's somebody you know through other people who you can trust, who has experience, and they're really excited about the film and want to work with you, then it's a good idea.
excellent. So
Yeah.
I thank both of you so much for coming on the podcast. I don't want to give away too much more about the movie that I suggest all of you see, and you'll see Louise and Palmer at that end scene. But Palmer, tell us once again the name of the movie and how people can follow you. Do you have any social media coordinates or the best way so people can kind of get on your list so when the film comes out they can see it?
The name of the movie is The Red Tide Massacre, and a lot of us in Florida know about the red tide and around the country too. And we're in post-production right now. We're on IMDb. You can follow us there, and also I've got a Twitter page that I'm working up on it, and we're also going to do some more social media. But if you go to IMDb, there'll be some links popping up on it real quick.
Okay, great. And then we'll look out on Twitter. Are you personally on Twitter yourself?
Yes, and I follow Rick. He's one of the
Okay.
people.
Do you know your Twitter handle offhand?
No.
Okay.
Palmer Edward 02, I think.
Okay, so look up Palmer Edward on O2
Palmer
on
Edward
Twitter.
2.
Okay, great. And Louise, I don't want to wrap up without letting you share some very, very exciting news on something you just finished writing.
Yes, I would say in addition to the fact that I am in the movie, yay, I'll be a famous movie star. I have the 9th edition of my book. It is currently at the press, and it's going to be released on March 24th. So Filmmakers and Financing, Business Plans for Independence.
Excellent.
And if you go to moviemoney.com, it was really nice of Rick to use my website to name the film. I like that. So if you go to moviemoney.com, you'll also have a connection to things we were talking about the film. You'll find out on March 1st, that will show you where the film is, because going up on the website, where you can find it, that sort of thing. And then you'll find out about the book and what I do.
Excellent. So moviemoney.com. You'll find out all the information about where to pre-order Louise's book, Filmmakers and Financing. And then you'll also be able to watch the movie in just a few, actually by the time this podcast is live, you'll be able to click and watch Louise and Palmer in this fascinating end scene, the last scene of the movie that Rick couldn't have written a better script.
There you go.
And somehow it all came together. So I know you're super, super busy, especially you, Louise, getting this book out just a few days away. So thank you so much for being part of the podcast. And I can't wait for audiences all around the world to see your story actually play out in the movie.
Right.
Fascinating. Thanks, guys.
Okay,
All right, thanks.
thank you.
Thanks for listening. And remember, it's time!
There's never been a better time to make your own indie film And if you have a dream project you're excited about and 100% committed to getting it funded, go to financeyourmovie.com and click on the green telephone button. You'll see our calendar, and if you find an open spot, grab it. You'll get a one-on-one call with me or one of my partners. It will be the best hour you've ever spent getting clarity and strategy towards financing your movie. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.